of Indian Education at all?
About
The Bureau of Indian Education.
no.
Okay, so basically, the Bureau of Indian Education is a division of the U.S. Department of the Interior. It basically manages Indian affairs for education throughout the United States, and they have about 180 schools that are controlled by them that are on native nation's land, and as well as that also there's 130 that are locally controlled by them. So basically, the two main ways that Native Americans who live on reservations get education is either through the Bureau of Indian Education running their schools or by the local tribal officials that are controlling their schools. That's one of them. And then the second is, do you know anything about how schools tend to be on reservations, like at all in
No.
America? Okay, so unfortunately, many of the schools that are run by the BIE tend to be lacking in a lot of the most important things, such as infrastructure is the first one, where a lot of them are running with either heaters or fire alarms or basic important stuff like that, or boilers that are really outdated and a lot of them miss inspection, as well as that in terms of education, they fail to have a lot of qualified teachers that are there. A lot of time they have a lot of problems with absences and things like that, as well as that a lot of them, because of their lack of funding, only teach English and math, and they don't focus on science or social studies or anything else, and that they only they don't even basically it's just that. But despite that, only focusing on those two, they tend to have the lowest scoring, the lowest scores for standardized tests in the U.S. And then the last question was that, with all this being said, what do you think would be some, possible solutions for this issue, in your opinion?
So, I guess the first thing that jumps to mind is to grant more funding or other resources to the BIE.
Yeah. Right.
Or just to bring this matter to more public attention.
Yeah.
Get more of the spotlight on it.
Yeah, that's a little bit what we're doing with this project. This was a part of it, just throwing an interview. So that's basically it. Thank you, man.
Right, sweet.
The first
Thanks so
question
much.
we had was just, do you know anything about the Bureau of Indian Education at all?
No.
That's fine. So basically, the Bureau of Indian Education is a part of the Department of the Interior that runs Indian education affairs in the United States, and they have about 180 180 schools that are controlled by them, and then about 130 that are controlled by the local officials of the tribal nation. So basically, and then on top of that, do you know anything about what schooling on reservations is like in America at all?
No, I probably won't know.
That's fine. But basically, it's kind of unfortunate because a lot of the schools seem to be lacking in infrastructure, education, and sort of accountability as well. Because a lot of them are relying on boilers and fire alarms and heaters and things like that are really outdated and don't work that well. As well as that, in terms of education, it's hard for them to find qualified teachers that stay for long times. There's a lot of problem with absences. And as well as that, it's that a lot of schools tend to only teach English and math, and they don't even cover science or social studies at all. But despite that, they tend to be some of the lowest scoring schools in the United States. So with that being said, what do you think some possible solutions would be for this issue? Just for middle school, high school, just to sort of make their educational systems better.
My one thing would be better career advising. I didn't know what I was going to do in college after high school. I switched majors 3 times.
Yeah.
So I'm graduating late. But
Yeah.
better career advising.
Thank you. So the first question was, do you know anything about the Bureau of Indian Education at all? No? Okay. So basically, the Bureau of Indian Education, it's part of the Department of the Interior. It's part of the the Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs. Basically, their job is to sort of manage Indian education on reservations throughout the United States, and about 180 schools are controlled by the Bureau of Indian Education. About 130 are controlled locally by their own tribal nation. And then the second question is that, do you know anything about what school is like on reservations in America? Okay, that's fine. Unfortunately, a lot of schools have a lot of problems due to the lack of funding that the Bureau of Indian Education gets. So a lot of it has sort of crippling infrastructure, or really bad infrastructure. So fire alarms that don't work, boilers and heaters that are really outdated, and sometimes they don't even pass inspection. As well as that, a lot of the educational programs only include math and English. They don't have science, social studies, anything else in those schools, and even sports teams missing sometimes. So it's just a really lackluster and bare bones system. And even though they only focus on English and math, which is what most standardized tests are about, they still tend to have the lowest scores in like the country. So after all that being said, do you have any just personal opinions about solutions that you think would help this issue?
I mean, obviously there needs to be fixes, but I guess I wouldn't really know. I guess maybe campaigning to get better
Campaigning?
funding or something
Yeah.
like that.
That's part of the reason we're doing this PSA, I guess, to get more
Okay.
awareness was a part of it. But yeah, we said there were a couple situations where it was like a lot of trusts or community funds went to help schools overhaul their programs, or just to run orientations that would focus on like the native language and culture just in the school system to make these kids not feel as excluded. So those are just a couple of things. Right. Thank you for your time. Do you know anything about the Bureau of Indian Education at all?
No.
Okay, so basically the Bureau of Indian Education is part of the Department of the Interior, and it sort of manages education on reservations in the United States. So they have
Okay.
about 183 ones that are supervised by the Bureau of Indian Education, about 130 ones that are controlled locally by their own tribal nation. So that's just sort of the basis of it. Do you know anything about what reservation or what schools are like on reservations in America?
I do not.
Unfortunately, they tend to have a lot of problems, so that a lot of them have like sort of very bad infrastructure, so boilers, fire alarms, and heaters are sort of really outdated, and a lot of them have failed inspection, but they're still used in classrooms, as well as that it lacks a lot of funding. I think it said that on a website they researched that it only gets about 67% of its funding covered for like each school, so everything else is sort of like they really have to like struggle to get it. And about some schools even only teach English and math, and they don't teach science or history or anything else there. And despite that, they have like some of the lowest like standardized testing scores in the United States. So that's just some more about it. I guess in your own opinion, or just what do you think would be a solution to this problem, if you had any idea?
Well, I mean, I don't really know like about anything about this. So, solution would be what was the bureau? Can you tell me more about that?
So basically, the Bureau of Indian Education, they supervise each of these schools, and
Is
another.
that like a government committee?
It's a government. It's part of the U.S. Department of the Interior, so it's all a government thing. And I think one of the main problems is probably funding. I was telling you that they need like this much funding. They only get 67% of the funding that they should have for the school. So I'd say that probably
Is that funding decided like when they do government budget and whatnot?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So I think probably one of the biggest issues is funding-wise, the government not being accountable for having the money, putting the money in to properly educate these kids, as well as I guess awareness. That's part of why we're doing this, because a lot of people don't really know anything about it. So the thing is that if we try and tell people, maybe be more likely to say something about it in the future.
Yeah.
So that's just one. All right. Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a good day.